Welcome everybody to another Beyond Terrain mini lecture. Today the topic of discussion is going to be genetics, and can genetics cause or contribute to diseases? This is a huge topic. Right out the gate I'm going to say obviously genetics play no role in diseases outside of the Mendelian family. We're going to expand on all this later. Now of course I'm not denying that we have genetic code per se, or that genes get coded into proteins. I'm not going to deny any of that here. The purpose of this discussion is to address genetics being used as a scapegoat when we don't understand the causes of disease. So anything like autoimmune diseases, heart conditions, you name it. If it's outside of the Mendelian diseases, it is not caused by genetics, and genetics plays no role in the development of this disease. So first and foremost, we could certainly observe patterns in heredity when it comes to things like hair color, skin color, eye color, things of this nature. But let's look at skin color and hair color. These tend to change based on the environment that we're in. In the summertime, my hair becomes much more blonde, and my skin becomes much darker in an adaptation to the sun. Of course, our bodies are adaptive in nature. This realm is adaptive in nature, not evolutionary. It is adaptive. Similarly, eyes can actually change color as well, right? Darker eyes tend to be unhealthier, not brown per se, but a darker shade of brown or a darker shade of blue or green or things of this nature. And the eyes tend to lighten as we detox thoroughly. This has been observed a bunch of times. The field of iridology really goes in depth into this. Agenus speaks about this, of course. And so what about something like height? Now this is a really good starting point, because the modern scientist will say that there are 700 genes that control our height, and that height is influenced 80% by our genetic code. But it's also well admitted that toxicity stunt growth and deficiencies stunt growth as well. So for example, in toxicities, things like hormone disruptors, so fragrances, xenoestrogens, anything that's going to inhibit the growth hormone, all of this is going to stunt growth. Again, deficiencies, right? Not getting enough nutrients, we know stunts growth and development as well. The literature also suggests that things like air pollution stunts growth. Childhood illnesses can stunt growth and development. Of course, we know that child illnesses are caused because of deficiencies or mostly toxicities. So again, it would fall into the former classes that we're discussing here. But a point that needs to be made is that things like height and development in general is completely depicted by our environment. We might say that our genes play a role, and that the genes carry our capacity, that perhaps our genetic code won't allow us to grow past 6 feet tall, and if you eat your proper nutrition and diet, that you will grow to that 6-foot height. Of course, we could see the unfalsifiability in storytelling in this kind of explanation, and this is exactly the explanation that they would give. How can we confirm that our genetics told us that we were supposed to be this certain height, right? It's sort of a circular, self-confirming explanation. A really important read is Dr. Price's work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, where he studied indigenous populations. He studied their diets, their lifestyles. And of course, he studied the development, mostly focused on facial development. He was a dentist, of course, so he looked at their teeth a lot and their jaw patterns, their bite patterns. Looked at the structure of their jaw, right? Were their teeth crooked and all squished together? Or did they have a perfect set of teeth? So the natives, of course, that were consuming a native lifestyle had perfect facial development, no anomalies with their teeth, of course would never need braces or anything of this nature, and had no cavities, at least little to no cavities. Now the natives, the same native groups studied in a modern environment, would have poor facial development, and they would have high incidences of cavities. So interestingly, one of his observations were parents who consumed a modern diet gave birth to children with really bad facial deformities. Now, there likely is some sort of environmental aspect to this, of course. Can some of it be corrected through proper environment, such as breathing through your nose, eating a proper diet, high in fats, raw fats particularly? I would certainly say that there is. And, you know, this is where it gets nuanced in the field of genetics, because there's obviously observations that show the health of the parents affect the health of the children. And when it comes to these children who have poor facial development, if they consumed a native diet, well, their children would actually have much better, almost perfect facial development. This was another observation of Dr. Price. And I think, again, it's very important, right? So there is a certain amount of responsibility that the parents have for the health of their children. This cannot be overstated. This is very, very important, right? It is our responsibility to take care of our children even before they're born, right? So our health depicts the health of our children. I wouldn't say that we have enough evidence to suggest that this is genetic at all. I would say that it makes a whole lot more sense to just look at the toxic load of the individual and perhaps their deficiencies as well. I'm sure that this contributes just as much. And look at the lifestyle, right? So even in development, let's talk about development for a moment. Environmentally, right? So as a child develops, if they breathe through their mouth throughout their whole life, you know, they're certainly going to have poor facial development. Their jaw is going to go back, their teeth might get crushed together, their tongue is going to fall, it's going to be a whole problem. They won't have proper facial structure or development. Now, we could probably go upstream here a little bit and look at air quality. Stuffy environments, stagnant air is probably one of the culprits for mouth breathing, as well as, you know, probably nutritional factors as well, not consuming a proper diet of whole raw foods preferably. So there's a certain amount of environmental factors. I would say that it all comes down environmental, of course, but that environmental impact can come hereditarily, in quotations, right? We can see that the environment of our parents matter for the environment of the children. So one of the largest criticisms that we could certainly give for this whole idea that our genes cause diseases is the idea of falsification, right? From a Popperian standpoint. If there are cases where people have these genes and they develop the diseases associated with these genes, I mean, in Popperian, you know, empiricism, this is a falsification of the theory that our genes can contribute to disease in this manner. And I think this is just overlooked in pretty well every field of science. We don't want to admit that falsification holds any weight. We've forgotten all of Popper's work. We don't employ a true empirical method, which we've discussed extensively on this YouTube channel. Let's take the example of the BRCA gene that's associated with breast cancer. Now, many screening tests now will test for this gene to see if you're susceptible to cancer. You know, the reality of the situation is that most individuals that test positive with this gene, you know, aren't going to develop cancer, right? And a positive test for the gene doesn't mean that you have cancer, doesn't mean that you're going to have cancer. If anything, it's just going to instill fear in you, and I don't really know the ethics, if it ethically holds up why we're doing this. I don't think that's been a topic of discussion. Maybe it's something we should expand on. So if you can have this gene and not develop cancer, and ask a modern scientist this, what will they say? Well, they will say that, you know, there's a complex interaction between our genes and the environment. But if the presence of the gene doesn't cause cancer, then the sole relying factor of whether or not you get cancer is the environment, right? So it completely relies on the environment. It's a direct falsification of this gene causing anything. This gene doesn't cause or even contribute to anything, because people without this gene can also develop cancer as well. And if you look into it, for every single disease outside of the Mendelian family, this is what happens, right? They can do this with diabetes. They can do this with, you know, a bunch of different cancers now. They can do this with anything where they have any genes associated with these things, right? It's a real problem, right? People can have these diseases without having the genes associated to them, and people can have the genes associated to them without having the disease. To me, it's complete nonsense that we are holding on to this so dogmatically. It's absurd to me. Any sliver of objectivity should completely reject this, and we should start looking at the environment 100% as the culprit of these genetic diseases. You know, so they find these genetic sequences, you know, they associate, you know, this is what a normal sequence looks like. You know, even though we all have variation in our genes, you know, but what they'll talk about is a single nucleotide polymorphism. And so this is a change in one little base or base pair of the genetic sequence, right? So we know that we have 4 different types of bases of nucleotides in our genes. Now again, there are healthy people with these SNPs, and there are unhealthy people without them, with the diseases associated with these SNPs. So it's the same story. Genetics is the same story over and over again, right? There is no real proof of anything. We can't even confirm our genetic processes. We don't even know if these single nucleotide polymorphisms are just mistakes, first and foremost. The real problem with this is that there's a lack of controls, right? So, you know, here we're completely out of the realm of empiricism, of true empiricism, even, you know, the pseudo-empiricism that's used. We don't use controls because realistically we can't, you know, in this case, you know, you're testing someone's genes. It's n equals 1, which again is not empirical. So not only is this not empirical, but of course it's not rational either. It cannot fit into the field of rationalism because it's completely logical. There is no logical string of argumentation, of conclusions, of premises. There's none of that in genetics. When you break it down, none of it makes sense whatsoever in any respect. What it is a scapegoat, right? We've used genetics and we're treating it as the germ. You know, they might do away with germ theory altogether and just try to blame it all on genetics. It's very easy because it's all uncontrolled, all of it's unfalsifiable, you know, none of it's logical. It's just an absurd field in my mind. And, you know, there is a large field coming out, Epigenetics, which says that our environment depicts our genetic expression. I mean, again, it's tiptoed into the realm of nonsense, but again, like, it does make more sense. It's more aligned with reality. You know, our environment is more important than our genes. They still hold on to the statement that it's a complex interplay between our genetics and our environment. And really what they're holding on to is the Mendelian experiments and diseases. So the Mendelian class of diseases are the ones where we could probably associate it to heredity. But again, we got to think back of Dr. Weston A Price's work, right? That the health of the parents depict the health of the children. So let's take the example of dwarfism. 80% of dwarfism is de novo, right? So it's created out of thin air. It doesn't come through heredity. And unfortunately, individuals with dwarfism cannot give birth without the modern methods, right? So this wouldn't survive adaptively in nature. And many of these Mendelian conditions wouldn't survive either without modern medicine. So, you know, maybe that's a win for modern medicine. We can keep more people alive. But the reality of the situation is that individuals with these Mendelian genes, right, it's associated with, you know, we can observe it more directly through heredity. That individuals with dwarfism will throw other people with dwarfism. They can throw individuals without it. I think that's a 25% chance. You know, and if 2 people with dwarfism have a child, then the chances go up. If it's 1, it's not as much. Stuff like this, right? So we can observe these patterns. And this is with a dominant allele, of course. You know, so it becomes a little bit different when it's a recessive allele. The chances aren't as high. This would include things like sickle cell, stuff like that. The real question with Mendelian disorders are, where did they originate? You know, a geneticist will probably say, oh, well, it was random. You know, a random mutation caused this. Again, we're completely in the realm of unfalsifiable statements, unscientific statements. You know, how do you actually confirm this? Nonsense, right? It's nonsense. The idea that 80% of individuals with dwarfism comes de novo means that it's something environmental. It's something completely environmental that's making this shift happen, right? Our environment depicts our genes, our genetic expression. You know, the health of our parents depicts the health of the children, right? So it might be, in a way, hereditary. You know, we might be able to test parents if they have a recessive sickle cell gene, right? And then they give birth, you know, 2 people with sickle cell give birth to a child with sickle cell, with a symptomatic sickle cell. But again, it's like, what's the genetic expression of the parents? What was their environment look like, right? What actually prompted this gene to be expressed, right? So maybe if it wasn't expressed through epigenetics and through, you know, our different methylation patterns, if you want to go more in depth, maybe the sickle cell couldn't develop. It's all very speculative, right? And there's so many questions that aren't being addressed, right? A lot of it is outside of the scope of empiricism. A lot of this can't be controlled. We can't make falsifiable statements around it. You know, so it's a real problem. But, you know, the real question with these Mendelian disorders is, where do they originate from? They've all had to originate somewhere. So the only case for a heredity, for diseases being passed down hereditarily, is the Mendelian family. Because it can be observed more directly. Obviously, Gregor Mendel's studies with the peas did a lot of work in this field. We could see these traits being passed down, and maybe these diseases need to be looked at more as the trait side of things. And again, what role can the environment play on the development afterwards? Perhaps here our genes are limiting, right? Perhaps they are limiting. Now, the problem with this is that really lies in induction, right? Gregor Mendel's work really shaped the foundation of modern genetics. We've tried to induce and create some sort of general theory based off these specific observations that we can, you know, slap it on across the board. The reality of the situation is that, you know, we claim genetics in pretty well every disease now. Even your susceptibility to germs and all that nonsense, you know, might be determined by your genetics. What we've done is we've induced a theory from these observations in the Mendelian trait-like hereditary factors. And, you know, we've extrapolated to make this general theory to apply it to all diseases. It's just a nonsense way of thinking, right? It's completely illogical. This is why induction is a poor form of argumentation. It gets lost, right? It gets lost. We're so far away from the original observations. So, obviously, hereditary plays a role in Mendelian disorders. Doesn't play a role in any disorder outside of the Mendelian family. There are lots of studies and experiments done to show this, but the problem is in the discussion sections, of course. We've discussed problems with the way we approach science, of course, in many videos. We have a whole playlist on that. I'll link it up here. But the reality of the situation is that our genes don't limit us. We have control over our entire existence. You may be dealt a bad hand in the start. You know, you may grow up in a very poor, you know, environment, but nothing's stopping you from changing that. Right? Some people are born throughout their whole existence up until, you know, their 30s. They're sickly, very sickly, many different diseases, you know, rheumatoid arthritis, and, you know, getting heavily sick every year, and then they heal, right? And then they heal, and they don't deal with it for the rest of their life. You know, people grow up, they experience traumas, and they have really poor responses, right? They're very fearful, they have anxieties and depressions, and then they heal. You have the power to heal. You have the power within you. It's in your responsibility. It's through responsibility that we can actually take care of ourselves and develop and achieve our full potential. Appreciate you guys for checking out the lecture. Let me know your thoughts down below. Give us a comment, subscribe. Make sure you share with your friends if you like this. This is a huge topic. We could probably delve into it, so leave your questions down below, and I might expand on it in future videos. Even maybe a little Q&A on genetics, and try and dismantle things that I say as well, so we can really try to make this argument as sound as possible. So any criticism is very, very appreciated. So make sure you leave it down below, and all will be addressed in due time. We're going to give away a book at $2,500. On the last video I released, we left a comment with the gentleman who won. If he doesn't claim the book, we'll have to give it to someone else. Maybe we'll give it to someone else in a month's time. So I'm going to tag the same fella down below. Make sure you go down the comments and check. Really excited to share this information with you guys. Thanks for checking it out. Appreciate y'all. Take care.